I'm going to talk a little bit about our weed trials. I've been doing this a long time, and one thing that I've learned for certain is that every year is a learning experience. And I think this picture shows what we're dealing with this year. We've talked quite a bit about it. It's been very dry. And that brings out a good question. As you purchase herbicides and make your plans for your weed management strategies, we've become a state and a corn belt, corn and soybean production where we've learned the value of soil applied herbicides. Number of our post-emergence products have holes in them that we've learned we need to fill up. And one thing we've been talking about is soil activity is one of the best ways to help out our weaknesses with some of our post programs. And as we apply those products, a lot of them say rainfall necessary within 5 to 7 days for activation. Well, I made a little chart here. I think we can see I started about mid-April when really corn planting got going, and look at how long we had to go before we saw. I mean, we got a little bit of rain maybe in the first part of May. We really didn't get a quarter inch of rain until mid-May, and it was quite dry. Now I intend to go to the next slide. A rule of thumb is 1/2 inch of rain for activation. That's probably a pretty good rule. I've got another rule of thumb is we do know this. Our soil applied herbicides work best when you put them on the soil surface and you get nice activating rain. That's when they really get into the weeds and do their thing. 1/2 inch of rain helps. My feeling is I often, if it's kind of dry out, it probably takes more than 1/2 inch of rain, because what I like to see is the entire soil profile wet. Then I think we've got good mixing and we get that herbicide active. So if it's quite dry like it was this year, it might take more than 1/2 inch of rain. If it's quite damp and you get a 1/4 inch of rain, that might be enough. But what happens to those herbicides when you don't get that? Now, when you apply them to soil, most of them bind to soil particles. And that's important because unless the soil leaves the field, like through a windstorm or something, the herbicide's still there. It just kind of waits. Most of those products we use are not volatile. They don't evaporate. They don't become vapor and leave the area. They're still there. So when you do get some rain, we still get some good out of them. So my feeling is, we didn't see optimum activity out of it, but we really did see some value out of them. And my other question here is weed emergence. It was dry enough, we didn't see a lot of weeds emerging. I'm going to show that. Here's our corn trial. Now this is a treatment, and that's what it's going to be for the season. Corvus plus atrazine, pre-emergence. That's what that whole program is going to be. And it looks pretty good at this point. This corn was planted early May. This picture, I think, was taken on June 4th. So looks good. But on the other hand, look at my weedy check. I have never experienced a year when I had to wait for weeds to come up. I'm like, are they even going to come? So we did have, that was unusual. Finally, one day I was out there, and Wade, our plot technician, one of our plot technicians, was out there working on something. And I remember saying to him, finally, it's starting to look like a weed trial, because we didn't have a lot of weeds coming. Here's what those plots looked like just yesterday. I went and took some pictures. I think you can see a few weeds coming. Now this treatment is what it is, and it's not going to be perfect. I've learned over the years that we have a hard time getting season-long grass and broadleaf weed control with just a soil applied product in this heavy weed pressure like we have here. Now, here's weedy check later. Certainly weeds are coming. We did get some rain, just that mid-May rain spurred a few of them on. But I've also learned that, yeah, weeds will come. We'll never get rid of them all. And this is an unusual season that we had that, because in most cases, you know, I tell people who are into weed control without chemical or herbicides, usually the best practice is to do some tillage and wait and plant a little later. But this year the crops seemed to have an advantage right away because corn came up in that soil, but weeds sure took their time, and that's an unusual situation. I've got a chart here showing I've rated, this certainly isn't our season ending ratings, but and mostly grass weeds are what escape these products, and that's been my experience over the years. So if we look at Corvus plus atrazine, at this point, 90% weed control. I'm expecting that probably won't maintain that. And I just put for comparison in there a couple of things that I'll be watching through the season where we put down some Acuron and then follow it with another rate of Acuron and a Roundup post-emergence or verdict down with Roundup post, where I'd expect season-long grass control. I think we will get that with our 2 past programs. Where will Corvus and atrazine end up? Probably a little disappointing, but we're going to get a pretty decent crop out of that. My whole point is here's Acuron in another trial, 3 quarts per acre. It was pretty dry, and that's all it got. It's not going to get any post-emergence treatment. Here's the weedy check from that same area. So those products did have some value, even though they didn't work what I would call their optimum performance, but we're doing pretty good. Moving on to soybeans. Now the soybeans were planted a little later, more like mid-May. About May 15th, we planted these soybeans, and I think you can see the weeds were a little bit. Here's a plot in that trial where we put down Zidua Pro, soil applied. This happens to be a conventional where I'm going to follow it with just FlexStar and Select. In fact, that application's been made, but I think you can see that Zidua Pro, compared to the weedy check, offered us quite a bit of weed control. So we got some pretty good activity, but we also had better soil moisture with our soybean programs. And I'm going to go over a few of those that we look at. I always try to kind of look at not every soil applied product in soybeans, but at least try to cover a range of those products. Now we know some of them offer better grass control than others. We don't often always look for a lot of grass control out of these. Some of them are designed to do some better jobs on ragweed, or some of the smaller seeded broadleaves are where we need help. And in that case, this would be the amaranth species. In our trials, I'm not calling it red root pigweed anymore because we've been in this research long enough, and we're starting to have a lot of programs that don't perform as well on water hemp, and we're starting to see the amaranth family of weeds move from the pigweeds more to the water hemps. And that's been occurring across the landscape in the corn and soybean growing areas of Minnesota. And I'm starting to see some, you know, little fine tuning differences here. The Authority Edge, probably not the premier ragweed product. Surveil doing a good job, and I expect that. That has the same active ingredient as First Rate, probably our premier common ragweed chemistry for soil applied products in soybeans, and showing up this year. Like I said, with grass control, not great numbers. Some of those offering better than others. Zidua Pro looks pretty good for grass control. And I've got some pictures of these plots also. Here's our weedy check again. The weed pressure we had to deal with. And I was looked more like a weed trial than our corn trial this year, where we had to wait for some weeds to come. Here's Sonic. Now you see those drooping a little bit. I took these pictures right after the post-emergence portion of these, and that is Enlist. And sometimes they droop a little bit, but boy, in a couple of hours. Now these are genetically engineered to tolerate Enlist. They're E3 soybeans, but they looked a little wilty, but that they overcome that in almost no time at all. And by the next morning, they look pretty good. That Sonic we do have good ragweed pressure in this trial, and it did a pretty good job. Here's Authority Edge. Here's Surveil. Let a few grasses go. Surveil, I'd expect to have, and by and large, it did a good job on most of the ragweeds. Here's Fierce. Didn't do the best on grasses, but like I said, we're not gonna worry about grasses because Roundup or glyphosate's still a safe and effective grass herbicide in both corn and soybeans. Here's Zidua Pro, another plot where this is in the Enlist system where we're using Zidua Pro, and it did a pretty good job this year in these conditions. I wanted to talk a little bit about one more thing in the soybean arena. Now, like I said, we're using the E3 program here, the Enlist program. Enlist is tolerant to not only the 2,4-D chemistry, also glyphosate and glufosinate. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, glufosinate, the active ingredient in Liberty. So you now have the ability to use those and the 2,4-D. Question is, if you want to use all those products, what makes the most sense? And what makes the most sense, how to do them in the right order? Because I don't think putting all three of them together is a wise choice. Be nice to be able to spread those out a little bit better so you can take advantage of each one's strengths. And I've also come to learn over the years that Liberty is not a rescue herbicide. It doesn't do well on big weeds. In fact, I think R1 might be the cutoff for Liberty use. So I don't look at Liberty as a late herbicide. I think Roundup usually does a little bit better that way, and 2,4-D probably does a little bit better that way. So it kind of goes against my intuition to use the Enlist and Roundup first and then come back with Liberty as the final pass. But I also know that most people, when they invest in the system that they're going to work on, if you've made that commitment to Enlist or the E3 program, you're probably going to do that first. So in our trials, we've got it both ways, where you use Enlist first, follow it with Liberty, or use Liberty first and follow it with Enlist. And I've got some pictures of how they look at the time. Here's the one when I was making the first treatment. I think you can see we had some pretty decent weed pressure before treatment. Here's just the other day, I took a picture of that plot with, this is the one that had Enlist plus Roundup applied first. Now we're gonna do the second pass with Liberty. And I think the good news is what does come through that will be small. The soybeans, I'm gonna have to watch the flowering date on that, but I think we can probably clean anything that might come up late in there with Liberty because they will be small weeds. Here's the other side of that coin where we use Liberty first. And I think you can see that Liberty tends to, its mode of action tends to make weeds get a little bit reddish as they die. And I think you can see the red carcasses are a little bit reddish carcasses, and that's a telltale sign of Liberty. Now we can come back and clean that up with our Enlist plus Roundup, which I think are better, in my mind, make better rescue herbicides, but I think this is probably not the way that we'll see most of it used. Most of them will look at using the Premier or the traded product first and then clean up with Liberty. So I think that's what I have. Did have one more picture. You know, it's been so hot. I've had a lot of people wonder, what should we do with our post-emergence products? We like to use a lot of these products that cause some leaf burning, but my point is just take a look at something like this. Now, nobody likes to see their leaves brown on soybeans, but look at that new leaf coming out. That's what I key on. And the injury that you see doesn't bother me. It's injury you can't see that I always get concerned about. And we can see that new growth is looking pretty good. I'm not too worried about some of the burners that we had out there in those hot conditions. Soybeans can take a lot of that and they regrow right out of that. So with that, I think we're going to try to get Jeff on the program here and still get you done at a decent time for lunch. So I'll answer some questions. You can always call me. We're here all the time, both Jeff and I. So don't be afraid to give us a call and let us know what's on your mind with weeds this spring. I'll have a discussion with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. We do have one question from Cameron, and I'll try to read it. And if you want to open it, maybe you can answer it better if you read it to your first, but I'll read it first. With E3 and Extend Flex soybean options for a mid to late June Liberty / dual / clethodim application, how late in the season should we wait for rain to hold the dual residual?
Well, I think he's talking about adding dual, maybe not adding it if he doesn't think we're going to get rain. I don't know if that's exactly his point, but my feeling is put the dual in. I think I wouldn't wait for rain. I would put them on. The dual will still be there, like we talked about. It doesn't evaporate. I don't think it's going to blow away. I think there will be a benefit to keeping the dual on there.